This class is brought to you by the M.A.G Network and is part of our monthly education series. To find out about upcoming online and in-person events, subscribe and like our YouTube channel, or join our Facebook page at www.facebook.com/groups/M.A.G Network. If you have comments or suggestions for possible upcoming classes, email them to mag.network@outlook.com.
Hello and welcome to the M.A.G Network. We're happy to have Suzanne Shires from Simple Homestead Living in North Carolina with us. Suzanne is a best-selling author and herbalist that teaches classes all over the U.S. and will be at both the Patriot Homesteaders Conference in Indiana and the Heartland Homesteading Conference in Kentucky. Today, Suzanne will be talking with us about perennial plants and vegetables for 2023. Welcome. On behalf of the M.A.G Network, I'm Indy Guy, and I'm here with Suzanne Shires, a best-selling author and herbalist from North Carolina, who's agreed to take some time out of her evening and share some great information with us. She's also been at two of our last homesteading conferences, and I believe she's coming to all three of our events this coming year. So very busy lady. But Suzanne, we appreciate you coming and spending some time with us tonight.
Thank you. Glad to be here. You ready for me?
Go right ahead, ma'am. It's all yours now.
All right. Well, thank you. I appreciate you coming in and talking about perennial plants. These are mostly vegetables that we'll talk about some wild foods. We'll also talk about domestic foods, but these are mostly vegetable plants. Fruit, for example, almost all fruit is perennial. So you've got blackberries and trees and things like that. We'll talk a little bit about those and how to incorporate those into your beds and your gardens and your homestead, as well as a food forest. So I tried to come up with things that are on all levels of your food forest so that you can work. I encourage you to make a list. If you want these slides, I'll send you the presentation. I'm not sure that I can get the entire slide program, the PowerPoint, to you, but I will at least have a printout. If you would like to email that, I'll give you my email address at the very end. We're going to talk about over 50 perennial vegetables that will keep coming back to your garden year after year. Oops, let's see this to move. There we go. First thing I want to encourage you is to identify. If you're talking about wild food, not domesticated food, even with domesticated food that comes back year after year, you will certainly want to identify that every year. Make sure you are choosing the correct plant. There are a lot of lookalikes. Some of them are toxic. Some of them are deadly. When you're talking about wild food or wild food that especially if you want it to come back year after year, you need to look and make sure and identify that properly. This information is for education purposes only. I don't expect anybody to plan a diet from these slides or even a meal from these slides. You do your own research and properly identify. Know the variety of plant that you're wanting to look at or you are looking at. Not all are edible. So you may have one variety. As a matter of fact, there's a couple of plants in here. One variety is edible and it's quite delicious, but the other varieties in that same family are toxic. So you need to know the variety, especially on the wild foods, and know exactly which plant you are picking. Don't go by common names. For example, Queen of the Meadow, in different regions, that is a completely different plant, different family, different genus, everything, depending on the area that you're going into. Kentucky, it may be Queen of the Meadow may be this plant, but here in North Carolina, it's a completely different plant. By the way, I don't think I introduced myself. I am Suzanne Shires with Simple Homestead Living. I have a little farm, a little herb farm here in North Carolina. I grow about 200 varieties of herbs, plus vegetables and fruits of different things, and it's a lot of work. So I encourage everybody to make as much perennial as part of your garden as you possibly can. Some people are looking for food forests to hide your food. Every one of these plants is a great addition to a food forest, or even if it's just your homestead. You can grow these in gardens. You can grow them in flower beds or even a perennial forest. And when you say food forest, that doesn't necessarily mean a dense woodland forest. A food forest can look like a brush pile, or not a brush pile, but just a jumbled up mess. But when you really get to looking at it, well, there might be a watermelon in there. There might be a peach tree, lots of different things in that jumble. But some foods are very neat. They don't look very jumbled. So you decide for yourself what you want to put in there, and don't be afraid to try these varieties just because I've warned you about identifying them. It's just like knowing the difference between a banana and a peach, or a tomato and a tomato and a squash, or an ear of corn. You learn that, and you learn wild plants the same way. So why would you pick perennials? You get a repeated crop with little interaction. Usually they don't require hoeing or weeding or the different things that come along with planting regular domestic annual vegetables. If you're starting in the spring or you're starting a fall garden, you always have to start the seeds. But with perennials, even if it's an annual, but it reseeds itself, there's very little work to do. So you can occupy your time with other important things as well. Perennials are easy to start. There are a few that's a little bit difficult, and they'll take something like scarification or stratification, stratifying the seeds. All of those things are we won't have time to talk about those tonight, but there are different ways to start seeds, start perennials, just like with annual vegetables. They make a great addition to a food forest, as we've already talked about. It's easy to add food to your flower gardens, and flower gardens can be extensive. As a matter of fact, there's a lot of flowers that are edible. So just keep that in mind as well when you're picking out the beauty in your gardens. Don't forget about the food varieties of flowers as well. Some can be grown in the shade. It doesn't have to be a dense forest setting. It doesn't have to be a prairie setting or a meadow setting. They can go either way. And some of them can be grown quite well together. Not every one of them has to flower before you pick it. So you may have some immature plants that are actually better before they get fully mature, or they may be available in the wintertime. We need the perennials year round, as a matter of fact, especially in the wintertime. If you're looking for a food source, you're going to look to the perennials, especially the root of the perennials. So all of those different perennials, different plants are important if you're following the seasons, or something happens to your food stash or your food security, you can go to your perennials and work on and use those for food. Okay, caveat about perennials. Not all perennial plants will grow indefinitely in all areas, and some varieties may be annual. Excuse me. Especially in zone 5. I know we have people in a lot of different zones here. Find out what your growing zone is. I happen to be in zone 7A. Some people may be in zone 8 or 7B or 5. Even if you're further up north, you may be in zone 5. So be aware of that if it's talked about here and you're in zone 5, that might be an annual in your area. That doesn't mean it won't come back next year. That just means it's going to seed itself and not come back from that same plant. That's the difference. If it comes back from the root of that same plant, then it's a perennial. But if it's coming back as a seed, it's technically an annual. But if you know it's going to seed itself every every year or even twice a year for some things like shepherd's purse is one that actually seeds and it comes back from root. So you've got a double bonus there. You can take those seeds and scatter it out. And shepherd's purse is both a mustard type green as well as a very good medicinal. A lot of these wild plants are medicinal, so you'll want to not only have those for a food source, but they can be your medicine as well. Certain climates may require extra care to be considered perennial, so that means you may have to go out and cover some things in order to get it to come back, or just plan on that to be an annual. I've got a couple of things here that just don't really do well as a perennial. Meaning if I expected it to come back year after year all by itself, it's just not going to do it. So I'll cover it. When it gets really cold, I'll uncover it when the weather gets warm, because here in the Carolinas, we have a bipolar disorder weather. So like yesterday, it was in the 60s and it's supposed to snow later this week. So it's just, and sometimes it'll change like that in a day. So sometimes you spend a lot of time in your garden taking care of your plants, your perennials. But it's not that bad when you think about it in terms of having to seed and grow and propagate and things like that. So we'll get started here and find out what we've got. Okay, a new word I want you to think about. It's called meristematic. That just means the tasty bits. You may have some things that have a meristematic end or a tendril or a leaf, but as it gets older, they get more tough, and you may find yourself spitting out a stem. And I've made up a new etiquette rule. It's called just to spit discreetly. If you get hold of something and you're chewing out the goodness out of that leaf or what have you, and you come up on the stem and it's a little bit stiff, you can spit that out discreetly. So that's my new rule. And so we can eat a lot more. We can get a lot more goodness out of food, especially in a survival situation. I don't think anybody's going to care if you spit something out that you just can't get down. Find new ways to look at food. You may have a lot of soups and stews, the chew and spit method that we just talked about. You may have a lot more salads as well. And wild food especially is not just about salads. There's a lot of ways to fix wild food. As a matter of fact, I have a new cookbook coming out that's called Beyond the Garden Gate. And I have a couple hundred recipes in there for wild food. We'll talk more about that later. Most of these plants, if they're domestic, they started out as a wild plant and they were bred. And that doesn't mean GMO. That means that they took the best, or if a farmer found some corn that had a little bit of a bluish tint to it, well, he propagated that ear of corn and developed it till it became blue. That's just an example. That doesn't have anything to do with perennial, but that's just an example of hybridizing or promoting certain characteristics. So something like cabbage. At one time, that was the brassicas in the brassica family, and it's a relative of mustard. So they took mustards and bred them to be a little bit sweeter. So and into a head, like a cabbage head. So that's just breeding. That's not necessarily GMO. Not saying that there isn't any GMO cabbage. I'm just saying that a lot of that those plants were bred to be into the way they are today, and that may have eliminated their perennial status. Okay, so let's take a look at some vegetables, and we're gonna talk about these. If you have questions, I've got the chat box up. You're welcome to ask questions. I'll try to be aware of it. I may get off on a little tangent and forget to look, but I'll try to. If you have questions, please feel free to ask. Okay, perennial vegetables. First one is arrowhead. Now, this is a wild plant. It's Sagittaria latifolia. You don't have to remember that, but remember, I did tell you that I want you to be aware of the botanical name, because they're in another area. There might be another plant called arrowhead, and it could be toxic. So if I'm only going by that common name of arrowhead, there may be two different plants. So that makes sense. Everybody look at that Sagittaria latifolia. And if that's a plant you want to propagate, be sure that you get the one that we're talking about, or you do your research on another one. The shoots are edible. They can be treated like asparagus. Tubers are edible. That would be the potatoes. This can be invasive. As a matter of fact, there's a bog near me. It grows in a bog, usually wet. There's a bog near me that it has just taken over. So this is one that you really need to be careful, and you don't want to propagate it, but you do want to find a place where you can get it, because it'll be a really good plant to have in your arsenal for wild food. You want to watch for polluted waterways as well, because it does grow in water. And if you've got an area that plants grow in water and you don't know if that source is clean, I would suggest not picking it till you know that is a good source. There's a lot of runoff from highways. And, there'll be a gathering pool there beside a highway or a ditch, and there's always water standing in it. You definitely don't want to pick something from a highway. And I go as much as 100 feet off of a highway. You don't want to pick right on a highway, because they spray, runoff, things like that. The salts and things like that can be a little bit detrimental to our health. Arrowhead is number one, and I love it. Okay. Let me get to the next one here. The next one is artichoke. Now, everybody's familiar with artichoke. You may or may not have had it. Cinnaria cardunculus, variety scolimus. It's a big mouthful, but just make sure. Usually most artichokes, that you're going to find seeds for, or a transplant, you're not going to have to worry about that, because this is a domesticated vegetable. And I like this one because most people just think of the buds there that you see in the picture, but actually the leaves and stems and shoots are all edible. It reseeds itself easily. No parts are toxic, but not all are edible, meaning not all are meristematic. Remember our word, that means tasty bits. So some of those, you could use those tougher stems to make a vegetable broth. It doesn't necessarily have to be something that you're going to chow down on, like an ear of corn or a green bean. You may be able to use that for vegetable broth, or it may get more tender after it cooks. But I've never met an artichoke stem that I liked. So if you can use it in another way other than just eating it outright, that's a great way to put it to use. Okay. Arugula. This particular variety is Diplotaxis tenuifolia. There are multiple varieties of arugula. This arugula is domestic, but there is a wild arugula called Rocket. Just like Rocket, Rocket Man, is called Rocket here in my area. You may find that it's called something else in your area, but most of those leaves will look like this in some way, shape, or form. Arugula is in the mustard family, so it's going to have a little bit of a bite to it. Domesticated arugula is bred to be sweeter, so it's not going to have that mustardy bite like wild arugula will have. The leaves and stems are edible, and some varieties might be annual, but most of the time this will reseed and come right back, and you can even get multiple harvests every year. You can grow this in a flower bed, and it looks really pretty with some taller stuff, and then the tall stuff like sunflower or something like that, or just different shrubs, roses even. Those, no, not roses, because roses usually need to be sprayed. But anyway, you know what I'm saying. But if you're growing that under a plant, so that it's got some shade, it's going to go a little bit longer, and it won't bolt. Now, the bolting is where it produces a flower. When it bolts, it tends to be a little bit bitter. or more bitter, but you got to have bolts to have the seeds. So you want to pick as much as you can. You can even pick those flowers and eat those flowers. I'll stand in the garden and eat those flowers, the flowers and the stems, because I love them. But let some go to seed so it comes back next year, or to propagate it to get a bigger crop, and then pick some of those tops and those leaves, and you'll keep your harvest going. Reseed it for the fall, because this is a cool weather crop. So this is one of those bitters that you'll want to have, especially the wild. You want to jumpstart your system at the end of the winter. In the springtime, you want to get that first harvest of fresh greens. That's what the old folks used to do. They used to have that spring cleansing. So those greens just really energize their body. And you can tell it when you've got really nutritious greens, especially wild greens, and you have a salad of those, or even if they're cooked, you can just about feel it coursing through your body and giving you energy. So I love greens in the spring, and I love cooked greens all winter. So get your greens in, and arugula is a really good one. Everybody's familiar with Asparagus officinalis. There's a lot of varieties of asparagus. Asparagus used to be wild, and it's been domesticated. You can get still find wild asparagus and bring that back home to your homestead. But it's so easy to get to get crowns. I can get crowns here. As a matter of fact, they're called Jersey Giant crowns, and they're less than $2 a piece. So that's a pretty good deal for what you see there coming up multiple times off of one crown. I would suggest everybody grow asparagus in the back of their flower beds, simply because the ferns, and when I say the ferns, that's the leaves, they get real ferny and pretty. You want those to grow tall in the back of a flower bed, and you're going to double duty your plants there, or double duty your beds, because you'll be growing edibles as well as your flowers and other types of food. The spears and shoots are the only thing you want to eat. Now they can grow tall and you can still harvest them, but once they start sprouting out, those tops there, you see, once they start opening up and budding out, you want to let it go, because it needs that energy. The plant does, so it'll come back next year. Plus the ferns, they're not really edible. Comes back but they are medicinal. It does come back every spring, early spring here in my area. So I'm expecting my asparagus to start coming up by the end of the month, and I can't wait. I love asparagus. The berries can be used for propagation, but they're not edible. So you do not want to eat the berries on asparagus. This is a plant that does need a little bit of attention. You want to make sure it has a clean bed, meaning it doesn't like to share. So if you put it in the back of your bed, don't plant anything else like the arugula. Where the arugula would grow, don't plant it on top of the asparagus. Just let it stay by itself, and make sure that it stays weeded above it, because it's a little bit picky. Okay. The next one is, believe it or not, bamboo is edible. The shoots that you see there in the picture, I don't know if anybody has ever eaten bamboo shoots like in Chinese food. It's bamboo. It's just bamboo. Bamboo shoots are full of a lot of nutrition. The silica in bamboo is very easily digested. Silica is what your bones are made of. So you're doing something really good for your gut, for your bones, for tissue and joints when you eat bamboo. And bamboo can be eaten, almost daily. It's tough when it's large, but when you get those shoots like you see there, they're pretty edible. You have to kind of peel it, and then the inside will be white, and you can chop that up. And it's usually better sauteed, but it goes great in soup. You can chop it up and saute it with rice, noodles, all kinds of stuff. The leaves, you can use the fresh young leaves for a tea or a broth. So when you think of tea, it doesn't have to be the old leaves. You want to get the new ones. Actually, hang on to that question, and I'll answer that one in just a minute. There's a reason why. So we'll talk about river cane. Bamboo, because of the silica, there are multiple varieties that are invasive, that are edible, and it can be invasive. If you've ever seen a bamboo patch, it doesn't stay where it's at for long. It usually spreads. So, but bamboo is a really good one to have a patch near you. It's one of those that you want on your neighbor's yard, but you don't want in your yard. So, Biden's, now, no, that's not a political joke. I promise it's, or I swear. What is it? No joke, no joke. Biden's is a variety of green. There's just quite a few of them. Biden's frondosa, Biden's pilosa, Biden's pilosa, tomentosa, tomentosa, I believe it is. Anyway, you might know this as devil's pitchfork, beggar's lice. You can eat the flowers, buds, leaves, and it's highly medicinal. This plant is actually used as a food source in Africa, which is where it came from. It contains, but you don't want to put this on property because it'll inhibit other plants from growing. It's got a chemical similar to the juglin in black walnut. You know how nothing will grow under black walnut. So you want to keep Biden's in its own place, and it can be a lot of headache because of the burrs that are on it. It's very invasive, but it is highly medicinal. It's actually really good. It's a wonderful, tasty green. So if you have it, take advantage of it. It's going to be one that you'll enjoy. I grow it, I eat it, I will pick it with another couple of other, I'll tell you about that in a minute. Lamb's quarter, love lamb's quarter and Biden's together, and I'll saute those with scrambled eggs, which is a way I fix a lot of food. So scrambled eggs with greens is one of my favorites, like you would spinach, or asparagus. I love asparagus. So bull thistle. Who knew bull thistle was edible? It really is, really is. You look at that leaf and you're thinking, there is no way I can eat that, but you can. So if you put on a pair of gloves and you hold one of those leaves, the tips, and you cut it off of the plant, and then you just take your knife and slice down and get those thorns off. Sometimes those thorns will be a ½ inch long, but this plant is highly nutritious, and you know that by its protection system. It protects itself with all of those prickles. But I would consider it a survival food because there's not a lot of people gonna go to that much work to use it, but it's really delicious when it sends the shoot up, and this is a biennial, not necessarily a perennial. It'll come back the second year, and then particular will die. So if you're going to use the root, you want to get the root before it makes a stem. By the time it sends that stem up, the energy has gone out of the root, and the root will be tough, so it won't be meristematic. But the young shoots, the leaves, as I just told you how to process the leaves, but the stems will actually taste like a celery. So you can use the shoots like it was an asparagus. You can use the leaves like we just talked about and chop those up. You're basically just getting so that you're only just getting that center rib and not the prickles on it. But the shoot, when it comes up, you'll have to peel it. But then you can also eat the thistles themselves before they branch out. If you look in the picture there, you'll see some of those little ones that haven't sprouted yet. You can take those and boil those and then peel them open, and it's almost like an artichoke heart in there. So they're really good. By the time they get the purple on them, you can get the immature seeds, do the same thing and boil those and pull that out and get the immature seeds. But the mature seeds are really good. I try to get them when they're fresh. You don't necessarily want to wait till the plant dies. or the buds, turn brown and papery. You want to get them while they're still a little bit green, but almost gone. And those seeds are really, really tasty. They're tender. They're not crunchy. And you can sprinkle those or just make a homemade. It's a little bit of work, but you can just break them open if you have gloves on, break them open and just pull out those seeds. And I've eaten them quite often, and I'll put it with other seeds as well. I like what you said there about blending it up with water and strain it like a wheatgrass. It's really good, really nutritious to do that. And you're not getting the prickles. You have to strain it really well. I have a mesh strainer that's almost like silk. So I can strain stuff like that out. And when you blend it, you're really breaking up those prickles. You can just put those whole leaves in there or that whole stem. I would peel the stem first, maybe, and then just use that. And I have a friend named Mona who, man, she can make some of the best juices just with her. You would think she juiced something, but she's just using her blender. She didn't have an extra juicer. She's like me. She's got a tiny little kitchen and she didn't have room for every gadget that she would like. But she still makes a juice with just her blender. This is very prolific. When you go out into a field, you'll see it all over the place. And if you catch it at the right time, you've got a celery substitute with those stems, and it's really a good plant. It's really delicious. Goldfinches love it. Yeah. Burdock. Burdock is another one of those. Arctium lapa. It's another plant that you're going to have to work to get it, but if you get it at certain times, it's a delicious plant. Now, the one you see there in the picture, this is a biennial as well, but I included biennials because they'll come back next year and they seed so readily that you almost don't realize that it's not coming back, the same plant coming back every year. But if you want it, once it sends up that stem like that, the root's just about gone. So you'll want it before it's the root. You'll want the root before it sends up the stem, or just as it's sending up the stem, if you can catch it. Those roots are called gobo in Asian cuisine, especially in Korean cuisine. Really good. They're meristematic, which means tender. You chop them up, saute them, scrub them and peel them, chop them up, saute them. And burdock roots are huge. They're huge. If you get an entire burdock root out, man, you're doing better than I can. The easiest way I found to get the burdock root is to dig a hole beside the plant and pull the plant over into the hole. Instead of trying to dig it up all around it and then lift it, you're not going to get that whole root. The roots are usually long enough that even if you break it, you're going to get enough root to work with, unless it's a first-year plant. If you're getting a second-year plant before it sends up the stem, you'll get a thick root, couple, an inch or so or more thick, but some of the roots are small, narrow, I should say. The prickles will get you, but those young shoots and leaves, I probably wouldn't eat leaves like you see there, but if you'll look on back, I don't know if y'all can see my mouse moving or not, but there are small leaves in there. Even though this plant is sending out its fruit, which means it's bolted, those small leaves will still be meristematic. They'll still be edible and tasty. So if you're hard up for some food, or you've got a survival situation and you need to find something to eat, you can boil up those leaves. Even if you don't have a shovel to dig up the root, you could still grab the little ones, the young ones, and go and use those in a soup, or make stone soup if you're out in the wild or something and you catch a rabbit or whatever. But burdock works really well for that. I would tend to stir fry it in maybe like a wok or a pan, because I like it. I like the plant. So I have a hard time keeping it growing here in my soil. I don't know why, but it's good to help break up soil too, especially if you'll chop it down before it goes to seed. you won't have that problem. You can get it coming back where you want it. So because it's a biennial, if you have 2 or 3 plants come up in one area, if you'll chop that down and then just sprinkle a couple, 1 bud's worth of seed, so you can control it a little bit better, you won't have a problem with it. But even if it gets out of control, you chop it down before it buds out, and it'll take you a year, but you'll get rid of it. Okay, so Camas lily, there's an asterisk beside this plant, Camesia scoloides. One variety with a white flower is highly toxic. If you're not familiar with how to ID or how to key out a plant, please avoid this one unless you have an expert with you, simply because it has a toxic. You really need to learn to key out a plant. And I suggest that for everybody, whether you're talking about your kids or you're doing it yourself. If you're depending on a plant app to tell you what a plant is, they're notoriously inaccurate. I have one on my phone, and I've checked it all the time just to see. I check behind myself is what I'm usually doing. And every once in a while, I'll check a plant that I know I have identified, I've keyed it out, and the most accurate plant app that I have, it'll come up wrong. So, and it's done it multiple times. So I don't trust a plant app. I have it, I do it a lot of times just so I can see the lookalikes and expand my knowledge. So if I know what a lookalike is, to me that helps. But I want you to know what that plant is. Look up a description for whatever plant you're talking that you want to find. Look up a really good description. Samuel Thayer is a good book, is a good author who has a very detailed descriptions. There's other people too that have descriptions, but find out exactly how many petals it has. Are the leaves compound leaves or lanceolate leaves, which means they're kind of shaped like that? Are they, is it, do they come off of the stem, or do they come off of an individual stem? Find out exactly what that plant looks like so that but this was a staple for Native Americans. You only want to harvest while it's sorry, I can't see my screen there, after it flowers, so that you know what it is, because the one that's highly toxic will look just like the purple one until it blooms. So just be aware of that the Camas lily has a toxic lookalike. So, went the wrong way. Okay, Camas lily. Cardoon. Cardoon started out as a wild plant, and it was domesticated. So it's one of those that, at one time, this was a plant that grew in the wild. The buds, the inner part of the stalk, is delicious. So I suggest you learn this plant, get it growing, and you can see how many buds that you would have. So one plant, even though it takes up a good bit of space, and it's a beautiful plant to put, it's very striking, and it gets pretty tall. I've seen it. My friend has one that's about 8 feet tall, and I mean, it's covered with blooms. And those are globe artichokes, just like you would eat an artichoke. If you've ever eaten an artichoke, they're best boiled. And you can just peel them apart and eat them that way. The stem is actually edible, as I said. Leaves, I haven't found the leaves to be tasty. If you'll look, they're too individualized. Those are called bipennial, I believe. I forgot my word. But you won't have much of those leaves to eat. So it's not like the bull thistle where you can just take the stem out. This one's going to be a lot of work, even though they are edible. But the stem is edible as well. You can peel it off and take those globes at different times of the year. So next one is cat's ears. This is one of my favorites. It's a dandelion look-alike. If you are familiar, if anybody knows the difference in this and a dandelion, how do you know this is not a dandelion? I'm gonna give you a test here. Somebody can type that in the box, or put your mic on if you need to. Do you know how to tell between? How can you tell this is not a dandelion? Anybody? The way you tell that is if you look at this plant, and I'm pointing to my screen, I know y'all can't see this one. Oh, have I gotten new messages? Yes, I'm sorry. Multiple flowers per stem, exactly. Every time I click my mouse off of the chat box, I can't see what y'all are saying. But yes, it has several flowers. A dandelion, there's one more thing too. A dandelion will only have one flower per stem that will go all the way down to the rosette. This one will have, as you see, it branches. So it has multiple flowers per stem, per long stem, multiple branching stems all the way down the plant. The other thing about a dandelion is that stem will be hollow, where this one is not hollow. It's actually got a pith, a latex, a non-toxic latex. But if you're picking it barehanded, that latex will turn brown on your hands. So it'll look like you've been staying in a cabinet or something, because you'll have this brown latex all over your hands. It's perfectly fine to eat it. Doesn't harm you. It is called a latex. You can get those buds. I prefer them when they're closed, like in the picture there. Once they open, you can still eat them and they're perfectly fine. But again, that's a bolting. So these are, it's about time for them to start coming up here, but they'll come up all spring. And in the summertime, they get a little tough because they've already bolted. But the way you harvest these, you just grab hold below that joint there where it forks, and you just pull it and it'll break. And sometimes they'll be 6 inches long, sometimes a little bit shorter, sometimes even as much as 8 inches long. And you can take those in, start a pan with a little bit of butter in it, and you bring them in and wash them, especially when they're closed. Like you see there in the back of that picture. And you take and wash those and then saute those in a little bit of butter, and it's like a plate of green spaghetti. I love them, and I'll put a little ramp seasoning or just salt and pepper and garlic, and they're fabulous. So I love them fixed that way, and I'll have multiple meals of cat's ear. Usually my lunch in the spring, I've got an orchard and I don't spray it. So I'll go out there, man, I'm picking my cat's ear all over the place. Hypocaris radicata is this plant, and just make sure there's another false dandelion. I can't remember the name of it right off the top of my head. I don't include it here in this presentation, but it's another one that you can eat as well. Let's see, cattail. Cattail is probably one of the first foraged foods people will learn, because it's very distinctive. That's not a hot dog. It's very distinctive. People know it. Oh, look, there's cattails. And I guarantee you, every cattail pond, if something hits the fan, the cattail ponds will be completely empty, because that's the one food people think about when they're thinking about foraging survival food. Typholatifolia, the pollen, shoots, pods, the roots are all edible, but I very seldom use this plant because of polluted water. You don't know if there's runoff. I tend to not use, and these will grow really well right beside the road. So I tend to just leave it, let somebody else get it. If you're eating polluted food, is it going to kill you? No, but it's just definitely not healthy. It might make you sick. So unless you're just really starving, know your water source on cattail. Chicory. Who's ever had chicory coffee? That's what most people think of when they're talking about chicory. Chicorum intybus. It's a beautiful plant. Love this plant. I have it grown in a field and I have it grown in a flower bed because it makes a pretty stem and it's got little blue flowers all the way up the stem, as you can see there. Well, the flowers are edible. The buds, the unopened buds that you see there, you can make capers out of those. You can saute those in eggs. The leaves themselves are edible, and the roots make coffee. And I've got an asterisk there beside that. The roots aren't as good to eat because they have a lot of inulin in them. But if you roast them and make your tea, which is the same way you make coffee, you can roast them and grind it and make a really good coffee with those roots. So, but it's the entire plant is a vegetable. It can be eaten. I'm looking to see what time it is. All right, we're just on the C's, and I'm going to kind of pick up a little bit here because we still got a lot to go. Chickweed, one of my absolute favorites, Chicorum intybus. Oh, that's not the right name. I've got the wrong name there. But the buds, the flowers, the leaves are all vegetable. They're medicinal and very diuretic. So you can eat this. Makes a wonderful pesto. Pesto is probably my favorite way to eat fresh greens. And my pesto, I'll give you my pesto recipe real quick, is greens. And I'll put this in my food processor. I might have 3 or 4 different kinds of greens. In for my pesto, I might get a couple of lemon balm leaves. By the way, don't make lemon balm pesto because it tastes like lemon pledge. In fact, with my hand up, that was the worst pesto I have ever eaten. Oh my God, I could have just polished furniture with it. It was nasty tasting, but the smell, it smelled so good. Chickweed makes a wonderful pesto. The buds, flowers, leaves, it's kind of hard to get any of that without getting all that together. The roots you can eat, but they're so small I wouldn't bother. I would just pull and wash it and use it however I'm going to use it. It is a diuretic, so if you're having a fluid issue, it's a lymphatic, very medicinal, this plant, and it's so good to eat, so good to eat. So I know I can't wait. And it does come back quite readily. Comes back really easy. So don't pull it all, let it come back, or find a place where it just is going crazy. If you have a neighbor that you trust them not to spray and they have it, man, I'd get every bit I can, chop it up and freeze it, because I love it in the summertime to add to other greens just because it's got that fresh taste. Especially for pesto. I'll just love pesto. Dandelion, #1 plant that people will go and harvest because you can make dandelion wine. The flowers, buds, leaves, roots. The roots are highly medicinal. It's a lymphatic. It's a liver cleanser. So if you're having a liver issue, check with a nutritionist to make sure that you can take it, because there are certain people with certain liver issues or autoimmune issues that do not need to take dandelion. But it's highly medicinal. The roots, I would chop those up and roast them for a coffee, or just eat them or pickle them. They're wonderful pickled. I use those little buds. I'll saute the unopened buds with butter. And take the flowers, those open flowers like you see there, and yes, Stellaria media. Thank you. I put the wrong name down. But you can take those flowers and dip them in batter and fry those, and they taste like a mushroom, like a fried mushroom. They're really, really good. The stems, even, I'll just use the whole plant when I have it. The unfortunate thing about this plant, when you see it like this, the greens are already getting bitter. So you want to get it when the greens will come up first. And then you can get those greens. And if you'll look at those greens, it's called dent de lion, in French, tooth of the lion. So because a lion's teeth actually go backwards, meaning that it can pull with those teeth like hooks. But if you'll look at the leaf, you can see that those indentions, those leaves come back and they actually point downward, point toward the center of the rosette. So you'll know that as an identifier for dandelion. Daylily, who knew or who didn't know daylily was edible? The entire plant is edible. Hemerocallis, and the SPP means that there's a lot of different varieties. And almost every daylily is, I'm going to say, is edible, with a caveat, because there are hybrids that I don't know. There's thousands. We've been to a daylily farm. If you've ever been to a daylily farm, I don't know how they can keep them apart, but they do. But the young shoots are fabulous. The petals, we just had some Saturday. I had a class here at my farm Saturday, and the daylilies are already coming up. So we picked some of the leaves and ate the leaves just out of hand. The buds, the unopened buds, can be stuffed with cheese or like cream cheese. The pods are delicious sauteed, and you'll want to put those in at the very last. I mean, turn the heat off and then sprinkle your pods in, because they're very tender. So you don't want to overcook those. Those petals, you can pull those petals off. Wash a flower, pull the petals off, and sprinkle them with salt. And you can even, put them in a bag and oil them up and make like daylily petal chips, like you would kale chips. They're delicious. I mean, they're so light, it's a lot of work to get enough to have a snack. But you can fill a dehydrator up and have a bowl full, but they're delicious. And then those pistons in the center, the stamen piston, you can eat that as well. So those can just go in a salad. The whole thing actually can go in a salad. Dock varieties. These are Rumex. Yellow dock or curly dock is the same thing. That's Rumex crispus. Bitter dock is one that you won't eat as much of the leaf. When you find it like this, it's going to be bitter. But you can eat those leaves of bitter dock or curly yellow dock, either one, before it bolts, because what did we say about bolting makes the leaf get bitter, because it's taking that energy to the flower. But either one, bitter dock or curly dock, or even red vein dock, all of these, you can get those seeds and just run your hand up that once they're brown and dry, you can just run your hand up that and just harvest all of those seeds, husk and all. And you can grind those up and add them to flour. Highly nutritious. You want to add about 1/3 of those seeds to your regular flour if you want it to rise. If you're just going to do like a flatbread or something, you're not going to worry about it rising, you can add more. But anytime you take away that gluten or take away from the gluten, excuse me, you're not going to have a rising flour or a rising bread. But the roots are highly medicinal. They're not bad on the curly dock, bitter dock. I don't like those, but you do want to get roots before it gets to this stage, because once you get here, the roots are really tough. They would still be medicinal, but they certainly wouldn't be edible. Fennel. Who knew that fennel came back year after year? The stems and shoots, if you grow fennel and you keep it chopped down, you're going to get bulbs, bulb stems like this. The leaves, the seeds, I love to go and get my fennel and just pick it off of the plant and just chew on it. It's just such a delicious flavor, and it's really good for digestion. It will reseed itself or grow from the root. But the leaves, if you let it grow completely to maturity, I like to get the seeds while they're green, just as they're beginning to start turning. I don't want them all the way brown. I want them just as they're starting to turn, and they'll be a little bit more yellow and ready to fall off. And that's when they're so good. And you can put them in with the salt, or you can put them in a honey. Or make a syrup with it, and it's really good for your digestion and for an upset stomach. Or you can eat the seeds alone. It's really good for an upset stomach. But those seeds are good to sprinkle on certain foods too. And the leaves, you can just chop those leaves up. Garlic varieties that are perennial would be Egyptian walking onions, nodding onions. There's other varieties. Those bulbils that you see there, they'll reseed themselves. And the thing I like about Egyptian walking onions is that stem will fall over, and where it lands, it'll start another plant. So they will continue to grow. They're not really invasive, but they will spread a little bit, and you can spread them too. And garlic and onion, I use it as a pest control. So I put it in any flower bed because that's going to help with pest control. Japanese beetles hate garlic, cabbage loafers, all the other let's say squash bugs, things like that. They hate garlic. So you can make a spray from garlic and onion, or you can just plant it in amongst your raspberries and things like that. And I don't have a Japanese beetle problem anymore because I plant garlic everywhere. It's in my raspberries. And all of this is edible, not just the bulb, but just be aware that if you take that leaf, that clove on that bulb is gonna suffer. But if you leave that bulb in the ground, it'll sprout, and you'll have multiple plants. If you're trying to propagate, leave your bulb in the ground, and come next spring, you'll be able to separate them out and have 20 plants off of that one plant. But I eat the leaves. I ferment the leaves and the bulbils, all kinds of stuff on the garlic. Garlic chives, that's a little bit different. This is Allium tuberosum, a little bit different than just plain old garlic, domesticated garlic. This is closer to wild garlic, which I've always called wild onion, but I found out that it's wild garlic. Still an allium. Leeks, garlic, and onions are all in the allium family. The buds will seed, the bulbils will seed themselves. The leaves, everything is edible on this plant. It grows in clusters, so you can go and harvest and separate that clump. And the whole plant is edible. Garlic mustard, not the same as garlic chives or even garlic. Alaria petiolata. It's highly prolific, but this is one of my favorite greens. It's got such a good flavor. I eat a lot of garlic, and this has such a nice mustardy flavor. The leaves are absolutely delicious. It does grow in bunches. The whole plant is edible, even the root, but I mean, you can dig up the root, but they're very small. You might want to put the root and you might want to put the root in, like when a soup, clean it if you can get it really clean. But this is my absolute favorite plant, or one of my absolute favorite plants, I should say. But I can't get garlic mustard to grow well. I don't know why. And other people say, consider yourself lucky because it's very prolific. It's very prolific. So just be aware if you plant it, that you'll have it. And even those flowers that you see there, you can just take and saute those or throw those in a salad, chop those stems up and put them in a dressing. Oh, they're so good. So good. Okay, good King Henry, Chenopodium, Chenopodium bonus Henry. This is akin to lamb's quarter. If you've ever had lamb's quarter, and we'll talk about lamb's quarter when we get to the L's. But if you, Chenopodium is the entire plant's edible, the leaves, seeds, the young stems, and it will reseed very readily. This is not technically a perennial. This is one that will reseed, but you can take those seeds and if you want to let the plant go till it bolts and let those seeds fully mature, you can use that as a seed sprinkle. I'd sprinkle it liberally like I would chia. You can use those before they get completely dry, and use them in a different way, like just in sautés and things. But the leaves, now if you look at that plant, you see those big pretty leaves at the bottom. Those are not going to be good because this plant has already bolted. This one is going through its life stage, So at this point, the leaves and stems are not going to be as good. You're going after the seed. So just be aware of whatever season that you're in, something on that plant is going to be edible. There's a lot of plants that way. Go to Cola, Centella asiatica. This one, be careful if you plant it. It's very important, wonderful for brain health, mood, and just bodily function, just keeping your body well fed and operating smoothly, because it's so good. But I mean, it will take over. This is imported. It was started as a ground cover. Well, let me tell you, it'll cover the ground. It'll cover where you want it to and where you don't want it to, but it is highly nutritious. If I have to pick, most every invasive that I know, that I use is really good. It's got a really good flavor. So this is one that I would caution to start. But if you know what you're doing and you know you're prepared for it to spread, then I would strongly suggest you get it, because you're always going to have a food source. Number one, it dies back in winter. It's not here in the wintertime, but I guarantee you it'll be back in the spring. So greens of different varieties. This includes cleavers, daisies, plantain, evening primrose, galangal, purslane. All of these, I just, instead of making different, because my program was getting long, I just clumped them all under greens. And I would suggest learning every one of these. Daisies, oxeye daisies, they're coming up now here in North Carolina. So if you know what the daisy looks like before it flowers, then you've got a ready food source. And I've seen them come up in the snow. So if you've got snow in your area, you may start seeing daisies pop up. The green mound, they grow in a mound, because this is just like a mum. If you're familiar with mums, you know they grow in a mound. So, but daisies, the entire plant is edible. So you'll always have a food source in at least 3 seasons if you have oxeye daisy. I'll use the unopened buds for capers and pickle those. I'm not really fond of the yellow center. It just has a weird texture to me, but the leaf, the flower, petals, the entire plant is edible. Same for cleavers, same for evening primrose. And when I say evening primrose, that's the sundrops kind, the one with yellow flowers. Onitherus, I don't think I said that right, but it starts with OEN. That one, not the little pretty pink low growing one. We're talking about the yellow sundrops one. Purslane, I think everybody's probably familiar with purslane. Galangal is one that is highly invasive. Don't go plant that in your garden, because it does take energy away from other plants. But if you have it, it makes it's a sunflower relative, and it makes this pretty little flower that almost looks like a sunflower, but it's tiny, tiny, as small as the chickweed flowers, really small. So, but galangal is prolific, very prolific. So just be aware of all of those, that you can eat those. Ground cherry. Ground cherry fruit is edible. Physalis spp, which means there's multiple varieties, but it's got the asterisks. Remember, our asterisks are not to be confused with another toxic, very toxic plant, the Chinese lantern plant, very toxic. This plant self-seeds. Only the fruit is edible. Oops, I didn't mean to do that. Only the fruit is edible. So don't eat the leaves, don't eat anything else about the plant except the fruit. Groundnut, this is chuffa. You may be familiar, you may have seen it. It's also called nut sedge or nut grass. The tubers are very edible. The stem is a little stiff. So if you're making a vegetable broth, you could certainly use those stems. But of course, that flower, even before it goes to fruit like that, like the picture now, it's a little not meristematic. So basically, really only the root, the tuber part, or the stem in a broth is what I would use. Time we got. Okay, hostas. Did you know that hostas are edible? Every bit of the hosta is edible. Every bit of it, the flower, the leaf, everything about the hosta. The shoots are wonderful. You treat those like like you would saute them like asparagus. Almost all varieties. I don't know every variety, so I can't say every one, but every variety I've ever found is edible. And we have an old homestead here that they've turned into a trail. There were hundreds of thousands of hostas, and I just have to sneak in there and just snip out some of the buds and come bring them back and saute them or wrap them in bacon. Wrap them in bacon and saute them in a pan or in the oven. They're absolutely wonderful. Hostas, plant you some hostas if you don't already have them. They're not invasive and they're beautiful in the shade. Lamb's quarters. We talked about lamb's quarters earlier, just for a minute. Chenopodium. This is Chenopodium album, and it's got a hoary look, Hoary. If you'll see there on the top, that means a white powdery coating. So you'll see that. That's actually a mineral. It's not like environmental. That's minerals coming out of the plant. So that means it's pretty edible, pretty highly nutritious. However, it does contain oxalic acid, which is a precaution for kidney stones. So if you're prone to kidney stones, I would avoid this plant. You could eat a little bit of it, maybe toss some in a plate of greens or whatever, but you may want to be avoiding a lot of greens consumption anyway, if you're prone to kidney stones. But it's funny, once you start eating a lot of greens and not taking the medications, and I'm not saying anybody needs to get off their medications, but it seems to be that a more natural diet is less prone to kidney stones. This grows from seed. It reseeds itself. So it's technically not a perennial, but it will always come back. It comes back prolifically. It's not that bad about spreading. It's pretty easy to pull up if it comes somewhere where you don't want it. But I just let it grow up in my garden everywhere I get it, because I just go down through there picking wild spinach. So, and the seeds are really good for a sprinkle, like a seed sprinkle, like chia sprinkles. Okay, leeks. You'll find perennial leeks that will come back. They're self-seeding as well as come back. The greens are used as a vegetable. Most leeks want to grow in the shade, or they'll come up early in the spring, but if you grow them in the shade, you get a longer harvest. But leeks, and if they don't look very prolific, or if they don't look like they're in abundance, you can just take the leaf and use that as a saute, chop it up, use it as a saute, or ferment those for longer use, and not have to pull up the bulbs. So make sure you're getting a good patch of them, or if you start them, and you want to keep your patch growing, don't pull up the bulbs until you have to. Linden tree. Now this is your top layer in a food forest. I told you we would talk about all the different layers in a food forest. Linden leaves or basswood, the leaves are edible, so is the fruit. But you only want to get these when they're small. So we're talking little leaves. If they're to this size, and why do we not want these leaves? You see the fruit already. That means the leaves are going to be tougher and the energy has gone into the fruit instead of the leaf. So linden tree is one. This is the tilia. The leaves are edible and they come out really early spring. It's considered a messy tree simply because it has a sap that it'll express. It gets all over your car and things, and the ants are really attracted to it. So if you have ants, look for something sweet. If you've got aphids, you're probably going to have ants, because they leave a sweet trail, and the ants are after the trail, after the excretion. So if you've got ants, you probably have aphids or something like a linden tree. Oops, let's see. Did I miss one? Nope. Okay. Lovage. Anybody ever had lovage? That's perennial celery. The entire plant, it may reseed, but it comes back from the bulb and it's easily propagated. And I'm going to just we're going to run out of time. I've already been here over an hour. So let's move on a little bit. Milkweed, only one variety, but you can take those pods and boil those, and they're delicious. You want to parboil anything to neutralize the latex. Any milkweed, well, only one milkweed that I know of is edible, and there's a lot of varieties, and there may be another one that's edible, but this one has a purple globe flower. You can make a syrup or a tea with the flower, but the stems, the shoots, when they're very small, are delicious, and the plant will come back if you take that shoot. But these buds, these pods, I get pods if they're less than about 3 inches. So these are getting a little bit longer. That bottom one, you could still get it, but milkweed is edible. Only parts at certain times are edible. Nasturtiums, it reseeds itself. They're perennial in certain areas. Certain varieties are perennial. The leaves are great stir-fried, or you just want to toss them in a salad, the flowers and the leaves. Perennial onions, I use the same picture, and these are kind of the same, but perennial onions, different types. Prairie is an onion instead of a garlic. So there's just be aware that perennial onions or perennial garlics, kind of the same thing. And just short wild onions in your grass, that's a perennial onion, and they're very edible if you haven't sprayed. And the way you tell it from its look-alike, which is toxic, this should have an asterisk beside it. The way you tell it is, if it smells like an onion, it's an onion. If it doesn't have a smell, then it's probably a wild iris. So you may want to be aware of that. If you're pulling the wild onions in your yard, make sure they smell like onions. Ostrich fern. Ostrich fern grows in the woods, but just make sure you're getting ostrich fern, because this does have some toxic lookalikes. The tips are very edible. Some people don't like them. They are not one of my favorite wild foods. I wouldn't pass them up if I was hungry, but just be aware that you do have to parboil those before you saute them. And that only takes about a minute, so you don't have to really just boil them to death. This is the most controversial plant. Love pokes, my favorites in my top 5 wild foods and wild medicines. This is highly medicinal. Toxicity is in the dose, but it does have to be prepared. Those berries are edible. I've made jam, I've made honey, I've made syrup out of poke berries. They are edible. And I'm sure you've heard your grandma didn't want you coming home covered with purple berry juice. So she told you, and you may even, I've had people say, oh, my cousin got their stomach pumped. Well, that's because they didn't know what you ate when you were 5 or whatever. So just be aware that poke berries are edible. You don't have to treat those. Don't chew the seed, which who likes to chew the seeds anyway? It's toxic if it's not prepared correctly. Those little leaves like you see there in the picture, I would have no problem eating those, and I've eaten those many times. I'll pull those, even though the stem is red and it's got berries on it. That just means that those leaves are a little bit more bitter. The bigger leaves, they're awful. They're awful by this point. But those young leaves like that, especially on the branches that don't have berries on it, man, I'll eat those in June and July. They're delicious. But you boil them once, twice if you taste it, and then if it's still bitter, you got some bigger leaves, boil it twice. But that's the reason that you're boiling, is to get rid of the bitterness. One boiling will get rid of the phytolactotoxin, and this is called Phytolacca americana. So the phytolactotoxin is water soluble, meaning you boil it for a minute and you've gotten rid of the toxin. So this is a very good medicinal, survival, and daily use plant. I would feed it. I have fed it to complete strangers at my classes and things. And I tell people, okay, I'm about to feed you something toxic. Are you ready? If you don't want it, here. If you're going to take it, sign a waiver. So anyway, ramps. If you are a little bit norther than me and you have a ramp patch, please see me after class, because I'm looking for bushels of ramps. I absolutely love ramps. Look for plentiful spots, harvest them responsible. And as my grandmother would say, it'll stay with you. Meaning, if you eat a lot of ramps and you eat them raw, people will know it for days. They'll know that you've had ramps. Highly nutritious, and it's part of the spring cleansing. So these are just really, really nutritious plants. Rhubarb. Who's got rhubarb? It comes back every year. Only the stalks are edible. The leaves are toxic. The roots are toxic. And that's an unusual thing. Usually the roots, or the stem is not the edible part. But for this plant, and I'm not sure if rhubarb has to be cooked. I didn't think to look that up. Has anybody ever had raw rhubarb? I don't remember. But it's great with fruit, easy to harvest. It's easy to grow. It comes back every year. In some areas, it might require some protection. So you might want to cover it. If it is up in the spring, you might want to cover it with a milk jug or something. Somebody asked earlier about river cane. Okay, river cane is edible. It's a bamboo in the bamboo family. The shoots, just like with the bamboo, the shoots are edible. The leaves are great for tea, or you can chew them. The silica is easier to digest than horsetail. If you're familiar with horsetail, you can chew on horsetail, and it'll really help strengthen your teeth. It'll help strengthen your bones. You can chew that horsetail or this bamboo or river cane shoot, and you can almost feel it. If you do that every day for a few weeks, you can just feel your teeth getting a little bit more strength to them and there's really taking care of those. You can eat it raw or sauteed. I prefer it sauteed, but I'll chew on one for my teeth a lot, or my bones. So Solomon seal, Polygonatum biflorum. There's a false Solomon seal, but this is Solomon seal. So in the way you know it, I have this little poem, not a poem, but a little riddle. False Solomon seal is very showy, and it puts its bloom and its berries out in front on the very end. So like you see that, like this is your false Solomon seal. The berries will be out here on the front. But the Solomon seal, the true Solomon seal, is very shy. It hides its berries and its fruit underneath. So that's where you see those berries coming down the branch there. That's Solomon seal. False Solomon seal has the fruit or the flower on the very end and not underneath. But the shoots are edible. The berries are toxic. The roots can be eaten if you boil them. And usually you will find this in moist, shady areas. And it's one of my favorite, probably my top 10 medicinals. You can make an oil out of this, and it's really good for pain, especially when I add it with a couple of specific herbs. It's really good for rubbing on joints and arthritis or inflamed joints. It's just a really good medicinal for that. Sorrel. Everybody's probably got a sorrel plant somewhere. It comes up in my area. I have sheep sorrel like crazy. The leaves and seeds are both edible. You have French sorrel, mountain sorrel, red vein sorrel, and sheep sorrel. Sheep sorrel comes back prolifically. The seeds themselves are edible. You can use those as a sprinkle or put them in an oatmeal. When I say a sprinkle, you can supplement oatmeal, things like that, even grits, or a porridge. Sorrel seeds and lamb's quarter seeds and several other seeds I'll put together in with oats and make a porridge. Just boil them and then put fruit in it. Staghorn sumac. Staghorn sumac is edible. There's 200 plus varieties of sumac. One is toxic, and it's poison sumac, and it has a white berry, and it'll give a contact rash like crazy. Now, some people may be allergic to Rhus typhina simply because Rhus is the same, RHUS is the same family that poison ivy is in. Rhus toxica is poison ivy. So, but this particular plant, if you find out that you have a rash, just avoid it. But it's kind of rare. I mean, it's not rare, but not too many people will be allergic to staghorn sumac. The berries are very citrus. You can get the coating off of those berries. The seeds are not edible; they're too hard. But you can cut this plant down when it's about 6 or 8 inches tall and use that as a shoot. Like you would with asparagus. And it is slightly invasive, not nearly as bad as tree of heaven, which I detest. Oh, I hate tree of heaven. If I should say such a thing about hating, I just can't stand that tree. Smells like peanut butter to me. But anyway, staghorn sumac is very easy to recognize it. Stinging nettle. Who has stinging nettle? This includes wood nettle, and this is one of the most nutritious plants. How do I know that? Because of its protection system. It's got something to protect. Very high in vitamins A, C, and D, very high in iron. This is one of the highest natural vitamin C sources. By the way, if you're taking a vitamin C off the over-the-counter vitamin C, it's probably made from corn, and there's no nutrition in it. So it's one of those little things we have to look for with commercial food or commercial supplements. But if you're doing stinging nettle or pine needle tea or rose hips, we didn't even talk about those, but those are your highest sources of vitamin C. The seeds are edible on stinging nettle, but you'll really want to use them sparingly, like a quarter of a teaspoon a day, because they can be a little bit harsh, which is rather odd because stinging nettle is one of the best kidney medicines I use. So I just don't use the seeds when I'm doing something for kidneys. But this is one of the most nutritious plants I use. Sunchokes. Who's got Jerusalem artichokes? They can be very invasive, highly prolific, I should say. You can leave them in the ground up until after a couple frosts. As a matter of fact, after they freeze or frost, they are sweeter. They tend to last not as long once they've frozen. So you may want to make sure they're covered over in the ground. You may want to pile up dirt on them if you're going to leave them in the ground till after they frost so that they get sweeter. A lot of inulin, if anybody knows what that means, artichoke with an F in front of it, is the way a lot of people will describe that. But the whole plant is actually edible. The flowers, the stems, if you can get bigger stems, well, let me just tell you on this next one with sunflower, that's in the Helianthus family, but you can take these sunflower stems, and sometimes they'll grow big, a couple inches in diameter, but you can take and split that stem all the way down and scoop out that pith. Highly edible, not medicinal, but it's the lightest substance on earth, and that's a flower additive. But of course, you've got the seeds in the flower, but the petals are edible. The leaves are actually edible. They're a little bit hairy and tough, so you want to get the younger leaves and boil those. You would want to saute or boil them. Parboil them is best, and then use them however you want to. But these technically reseed. They're not perennial, but I have them come back in the same place every year. I'll leave some seeds out there, and then the birds will spread them too. Tree collards. That's a variety of collard, Brassica oleracea. They're easy to maintain. Now, in certain zones, you might have to protect them to get them to come back every year, but they can reseed. The whole plant is edible, but you see that stem, by that time that stem is not very edible, but you can make a broth with it and get the nutrition out of it that way. You can plant it in a flower bed, and it's really pretty in the back because they'll grow kind of tall, and plant your something like nasturtiums underneath, and that'll kind of do double duty in your flower bed. Violets are edible. They're mucilaginous, which means they're kind of slick, like think okra water. But violets actually go really well in a gelatin. So you can put pretty violet flowers in your Jell-O or on other desserts, or use them for decoration. They're highly medicinal because the mucilage actually coats your throat, or coats your digestive or your bladder, all the way down through that digestive system from mouth all the way down. It kind of helps that mucous membrane starting at your mouth and all the way down. It kind of helps coat that and heal it. But make sure it's a violet, because pansies and some other things are not edible. Watercress. Watercress grows wild. It's highly nutritious. I don't think did we talk about purslane? Purslane and watercress are two that not my favorite, just because I don't like their flavor for some reason. I don't know why. I can't really put my finger on it. But these will come up in cool weather. They're in the fall. They'll come up early spring. So if you protect it, the watercress, Nasturtium officinale, may even come up in a cold frame all winter. So it's one of those greens that you could probably grow. And if you don't have a cold frame or don't know what a cold frame is, COLD frame, look them up. They're wonderful to help keep plants going all winter. Let's talk just a minute about perennial fruit. Of course, you got pears and blackberries and muscadines and grapes, raspberry, apple. I can't see what that last one is. All of these are, they'll come back every year. You don't have to reseed them. Strawberries, they take a little bit of, they'll come back, but they take a little bit of work. You got to cover them. You got to get rid of the daughters or the old plants and the daughters take over, that kind of thing. Also, unusual fruits, gooseberry, currant, fig, cranberry, serviceberry. All of those will come back every year with very little maintenance. The fig is my hardest thing I have. And it's very temperamental. So in zone 5, sorry, you may not have it come back or may not fruit, simply because it's actually a tropical or subtropical. So if you protect it really well, you may get fruit. If you're really fond of figs, work with that on a fig. So grow your food, have your food independence. Have easier harvests with all of your perennials. Your native species are usually perennial, and propagate them, build your food forest. And fig leaves are, by the way, Shelley just said she drinks fig tea. Fig leaves are highly medicinal. The latex leaf, everything. You can use a fig leaf for a wrap, a food wrap, like a dolma, like you would a grape leaf. They're edible too. So the leaf itself. Okay, that's what I have. For more information, you can contact me. If you'd like this presentation, I'll be glad to send it to you. I don't know if I can send you the PowerPoint, but I'll at least send you the list. And you can please go to my website and get more information on a lot of different things. And thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Suzanne. We hope you found this class beneficial and that it gives you some good information on some possible new plantings for your garden this year. We are working on more great learning and fellowship opportunities, so be sure to subscribe and like our YouTube channel or join one of our Facebook groups to keep up with the latest information. Again, I want to thank Suzanne Shires from Simple Homestead living in North Carolina for opening up her home to us and sharing some great information. On behalf of the M.A.G Network, I am Indy Guy. Be safe and have the knowledge.